So our first question, how do you envision fulfilling your role as chief pastor to the clergy of this diocese? What would that pastoral support look like? How would you encourage the clergy to come to you?
Thank you. That's helpful. These are long questions. They are multi-part questions. So right now, as Canon to the Ordinary in the Diocese of Fort Worth, I am the chief pastor, basically. The Diocese of Fort Worth, as you may know, how many of you know that the Diocese of Fort Worth had a split? You sort of know? Okay. So that was a decade ago, if you can believe it. And we still have provisional bishops. Currently, Bishop Scott Mayer is our bishop. He's fabulous. We share him with the Diocese of Northwest Texas. Actually, they shared him with us. He was their bishop for 8 years first. And they shared him with us, and he is in our diocese about 3 or 4 days a month. We would love to have him more. He is very available by phone and text, but a lot of the emergencies fall to me, and happily so. So I go is the answer to that question. That's part of how I'm the chief pastor, is I go to be where our clergy are when they need me. I also help coordinate the clergy days and retreats and that sort of thing. That's new for our clergy. And the way we have decided to handle that, the education and the retreats, is we ask the clergy what they want and what they need. And then we do that. So for several years, around the time that I started, so I started in this role in 2013, the clergy said, we want to be a part of a bigger group for clergy retreat. And the Diocese of Texas invited us to go to their super fabulous big name speaker conference, right? It was great. And the food was good too. But after a few years of that, our clergy said, you know, we want our own thing. We know we're small, but we want our own thing. And so now we do that. And I think a huge part of being a pastor of any individual or group is listening first. Support also looks like me not going. So sometimes I can't, sometimes I shouldn't. And so we do pastoral care in partnership.
Great, thank you very much. What do you think of the current strategic plan for the diocese? How would you see yourself leading the collaborative effort to continue to renew this plan? And do you have a vision for where God might be calling ECR next?
Thank you. I love the strategic plan of your diocese. When I read it, I thought, that looks a lot like ours. So we always love it when we're on the same page and when our own kind of instincts about what needs to happen in the church are affirmed. And here's what I hear in your strategic plan. That you think what the diocese is for is to help, support, encourage, uplift the congregations. And to build a bridge between the congregations and the diocese and the wider church. In our diocese, that's what the diocese is for. So the diocese doesn't have another agenda, that's the agenda. And I love it, because I believe that the loving, liberating, life-giving God is doing what God's doing where you are. So, in my experience, plans get renewed by doing them. So you try something and you succeed. Yay! Then you think, okay, is that something that we need to continue to have, or is that something that we're done with? You try something new and it fails. And you say, okay, what can we learn from that? What are we going to do next? And those successes and failures and the longings of your heart Those are what shape and renew the plan. Living into it, living into the plan in relationship with each other, in relationship with your bishop, in relationship with your God, in relationship with your neighbor. That's how the plan gets renewed. And then this says, do you have a vision for where God might be calling the Diocese of El Camino Real? Yes. In one word, that vision is, or two words, moving out. Moving out. Maybe out of your building, if you want, if that's your vision. Maybe to a new part of town. Maybe you're staying exactly where you are, but you are connecting more deeply with your community. Here's the other thing about that vision. Each congregation has its own vision. And your congregation may not be in a place where it's ready or where it's the right thing to focus on to reach out. Maybe you need to go reaching in more deeply spiritually. It's the intentionality that keeps us on track with our vision.
Thank you. Jail ministry and reentry into society is an important ministry, not only in ECR, but also in the Episcopal Church. What does all are welcome mean to you with regard to the incarcerated and those in reentry from jail or prison? Does your answer change if they are a sexual offender or if their crime was violent? Please explain.
Jail ministry and reentry is a huge ministry that needs to be done in our communities. Fortunately, in Fort Worth, we have an organization called Texas Reentry. And our congregations and our diocesan office partner with that organization to help people get what they need as they reestablish themselves in the community. Some of our congregations make actively invite folks, like they go to Texas Reentry and talk to folks there. I get phone calls. I got a phone call this week. Somebody was looking for an AA meeting. So those conversations always start out with questions. Where do you live? What kind of transportation do you have? And to really be sensitive to the fact that this is a long journey, and we need to figure out how to get on board with them where they are before we, make a lot of recommendations and stuff. All are welcome means all are welcome. And it means that if we're really being welcoming, we have to look outside our own intuitions and comfort zone and consider how somebody else might want to be welcomed. That has a lot to do with listening, but sometimes the visitors to our congregations don't talk first. They come and hang around and kind of see. And in my experience, one of the best things that we do to welcome people is to treat each other well in our congregations. People figure out whether or not the congregation is a safe place for them by how you treat the people on the margins in your congregation. And there are always people who aren't in the center for whatever reason. So that's the place to start. Yes, folks who have been incarcerated absolutely need to be a part of the fabric of our communities, and some of them have been sexual offenders, and some of them have been violent. And that's why we have safe church training. So hopefully that's happening here. I think that's happening here. Lots of our lay people have been trained, and I have been a part in several congregations of sitting down with the leadership of the congregation and making a plan. That conversation includes the person that we're trying to help, that we're trying to incorporate, so that we can make a plan that will help that person feel comfortable and incorporated rather than singled out and policed.
Thank you. What would you do to increase understanding of the call to ordination? And this is both for priestly and diaconal. And to help them and to help local congregations discern vocations among them? Should there be an age limit in place regarding ordination to the priesthood or the vocational diaconate?
So I think the best way to nurture and plant seeds and grow our cadre of clergy is to be tending and nurturing and growing the ministry of each and every one of us, the ministry of all the baptized. So in my own experience, I was sponsored for ordination. I was the first woman sponsored for ordination by St. Timothy's in Salem, Oregon. St. Timothy's has sponsored, I don't know, somewhere between a dozen and 20 people for ordination in the last 30 years. That congregation gets people thinking about their role in the church really early on. I'll tell you a quick story. So I was a college student when I first went to that church, and on Stewardship Sunday, the rector said, all you college students over there, don't fill out one of these pledge cards. I mean, you can if you want to, but don't. Because you know what's going to happen is you're going to stay in this congregation and you're going to get married up and you're going to have families, and then you're going to be pledging. Right? So that gave us the freedom to just be who we were, right? Which was poor college students. So that's where I think it starts. And where it starts is the newcomers class, and where it starts is the Bible study, and where it starts is anywhere in the congregation where the question is being asked, where do you see God? Where do you see God? What is God up to? And how can you get on board with that? Then, some people sort themselves out and, they have a vocation, quote unquote, I hate that. But, they have a role, a particular role with a collar in the church. What my bishop always likes to say is, you need to know, so this is what he says to people who are in the ordination process. You need to know that there are some things you give up. So think long and hard about whether or not you want to be under the authority of a bishop. Just saying. Mary's in the corner. Should there be an age limit in place regarding ordination to the priesthood or the vocational diaconate? So I am suspicious that that question has a story behind it. And so what I would say is, in the Diocese of Fort Worth right now, we are, Lord willing and the people consenting, going to ordain somebody who is 72. It works. It's going to be appropriate in that context. I'd have to talk to you about what's appropriate in your context.
Thank you. What are your plans for effectively communicating with the diocese should you be elected? How will we come to know you? What mechanisms would you use for allowing your voice to be heard around the diocese?
When I was the rector of a congregation, one of my favorite ways to communicate was a weekly blog post. It gave the congregation and I, the people who were there on Sunday and the people who weren't there on Sunday, an opportunity to connect with each other. I would love to have a blog again. It is not appropriate, really, for me to have a blog in my role now, because the voice that people need to hear is the bishop's voice. But I would love to get back to that. I would use Twitter more than I do now. I would use Facebook with a different audience than my Facebook page now has. Now the Facebook page is kind of, in general, our diocese, but also other clergy and Christians and non-Christians and my high school classmates. It's kind of very general. If I were your bishop, I would anticipate that either my Facebook page would change and become more focused, or we'd have a Facebook page that we shared among us and we'd do it that way. We live in an age of communication, and I believe that communication is one of the key things that the diocese can do to support our congregations. To communicate well lifts us all up and helps people be aware of what we're up to. And the world needs to know. We don't want to hide our light under a bushel. Yeah, and then I think strategizing with you all about what works in your community. So if your local newspaper gets read by everybody every week, we go to the local newspaper. If nobody reads the newspaper in your town anymore, we go to the TV or to the billboards or to the bus wraps or to the screen at the movie, you know, where you go and there's, you know, ads and stuff. Captive audience.
At our last planned question, how would you engage, inspire, and lead the laity in ECR towards living more fully into the Baptismal Covenant?
Thank you. For each of us as Christians, the biggest thing we have to offer our fellow Christians is our own personal witness. Our own personal successes and failures at various spiritual disciplines, our own story about how we're connecting to God and where it is that we're missing God. That's the place that it starts. I would hope that your local clergy are already doing that. I kind of assume that they are. Helping the folks in your congregations make that personal connection. As your bishop, I think it's hard. The whole visitation thing is hard because we don't get to spend enough time with people as canons and bishops. And so I would love to brainstorm with you about how to get time to have conversations about how the diocese can support your personal spiritual life, which is the ground of our relationship with God.
Thank you very much. Well, you have been incredibly efficient in answering our questions.
Good, because this is my favorite part.
We might have room for 2 questions. So who would like to ask Canon Janet a question?
And then we'll get you.
Please stand. Please. No, no.
Wait, now the pressure's on. Diocese, your neighboring diocese, went through a terrible disaster recently. And so here in California, our neighboring dioceses are also doing that. So I was just wondering how you as a leader in your diocese inspired and engaged in that work.
Yeah, our neighboring diocese, the Diocese of Texas, and actually the Diocese of West Texas, they've both had terrible disasters in the last couple of years. The first thing we do, you may get tired of hearing me say this, but it's the thing that I know to do, and that is the first thing we do is listen. We make the phone call to our counterpart, me to the canon and the bishop to the bishop, and folks who know each other and say, how is it that you can be helpful? One of those dioceses said, don't come here. At the beginning they said, don't come here. That's not actually helpful. And so we, of course we put them in the prayers of the people. Of course we have conversations, sometimes living room conversations. I know that you all are involved with those, that help us more deeply understand what's needed, and then we move out in that direction. And the bishop and I feel like our number one role is to say yes as many times as we can. So if your parish has a vision for something and you really feel called to it, then how is it that we can support you in it?
Thanks. So I grew up on the East Coast, and in that area, and like Texas, I'm sure, people who don't go to church, they know what's going on inside. I've found here, I've been here for 20 years, there are a lot of people who don't go to church and have no idea what goes on inside these walls. What's your sense of ways to help people understand what goes on in here and maybe even want to come and be part of it.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you. I love these questions and engaging with you. Before I answer that question, I'm going to introduce my husband so that they don't cut me off. In the back is my husband, Ed Waggoner. He is Dr. Ed Waggoner. He is a theologian, and he works at Bright Divinity School in Fort Worth. In answer to your question, we take the treasures that we have as the Episcopal Church out there and show them off. I spent Ash Wednesday on Sundance Plaza in Fort Worth, right downtown, and the stories I heard from folks blew me away. And what was really humbling and touching is that people said over and over again, "Thank you for being here. Thank you, thank you, thank you." People shouldn't have to be that grateful. We should be showing up more often where they can be. And if that is Wednesday Eucharist at lunch in an office building downtown, let's dream into that and figure out how to do it. If it's, we have these special things we do, like, Ashes to Go, but what about some kind of opportunity to sing and talk about hymns? I used to work as a recreational therapist in a care facility, and it was heaven when somebody came in to play the piano and sing. The Eucharist was all right, but the singing was fabulous because it touched down in that place in people's hearts where they live. So anyway, that's does that answer your question?